Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Kuf Nun Beis primarily discusses old age and then moves into the death of the human and what happens after he dies and how the soul remains connected to the body and to what extent it separates from it. The Gemara begins in the first part. It is explaining the psukim at the end of Koheles, which we were discussing at the end of the last daf. The psukim there have Shlomo HaMelech describing that one should remember Hashem before he becomes old, and it describes a lot of the things which stop working and fall apart in old age. The Gemara will explain the psukim there, and sprinkled along with that, the Gemara will have a few agadatas and various other stories. And then we'll get to the death and after death. So the Gemara begins by discussing the pasuk which says, "B'yem sheyezu shemri abayis v'his avsu anshe yachayil batu atoichanois ki miyetu v'chashchu haroyes barubais." This is describing old age. And Shlomo Melech says, on that day the guards of the house will shake. That refers to the sides and the ribs, which are guarding the internal organs. His avusu anshe yachayil, that the strong men will bend over. This is referring to the legs, which are the strong muscles that hold up the body. Ubato hatechanos kimeatu, that's referring to the teeth, the grinders. There are a few of them because a lot of them have fallen out. And chashchol harais ba'arubais, the darkening of those who see through the windows, that's referring to the eyes that do not see as well. Now, the Gemara has a story here where it says that the Kesar said to Yeshua ben Chanani, how come you don't come to Bei Avidon? Bei Avidon was a place where Apikarsim debated with the Talmidei Chachamim, and many Talmidei Chachamim refused to go, as we saw much earlier in the Masechta. So Yeshua ben Chanani often defended Klal Yisrael against these Tzedukim and Apikarsim, but he didn't go there. So he asked him, why not? And he said, the mountain's all snowy and there's ice around it, and the dogs no longer make any noise, and the grinders don't grind. He was referring to himself, meaning to say he has white hair on his head, he has white hair in his beard and his mustache, his voice isn't heard anymore, so therefore he's already not holding by going to debate at Bei Avida. Now, in the Bei Rav, they said that he also added, Rabbi Shua ben Chanani, he said, and I look like somebody who's looking for something that he didn't lose. Rashi explains that means that he's bent over and he's stooped and he shakes when he walks, and it looks like he's searching for something on the floor, but he didn't actually lose anything. Okay, a brisa about old age. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma says 2 is better than 3, meaning if you have 2 legs that work, it's better than 3 legs that do not work as well. 3 legs referring to the 2 and the cane. And about this thing that leaves and doesn't come back. What is it that leaves and doesn't come back? It's referring to youth. As Rav Chizda says, and Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said youth is like a crown of roses, and old age is like a crown of thorns. Now, the Mepharshim were explaining that they were complaining about the fact that they no longer had the same taivas, desires that they had when they were young, and therefore they didn't get schar for withholding from Averis that they could have had that schar when they were younger. Now, the Gemara quotes another brisa, says, chew your food well, and then you'll find that you'll be able to walk with more energy. You'll get the energy of the food. Like the pasuk says, if you'll eat your bread well, so you'll be good, and you won't see bad. Rav Shmuel, the Gemara says, Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, Shinana, sharp one, open your sack, open your mouth, and let the bread go in, because you need that. And the Gemara here adds, and until you're 40 years old, it's good to eat solid food, and afterwards it's better to drink liquids. Okay, now the Gemara has an exchange between Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, who was bald, and a Saris, who was a Tzeduki. Now, a Saris is a servant of the king that is castrated in order to serve for him. So he was a Tzeduki. So he started up with Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, and he was making fun of him that he's bald, and he answered him back, making fun of the fact that he was a Saris. So the Gemara says that the Saris said to Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, how far is it from here to Baldville? So he said, as far as it is to Sarisville. So he said that the goats that have no hair are sold for only 4 dinarim. Nobody wants them. They don't have any wool. So he said, well, if we would be a goat, you'd be better off, because the castrated ones are sold for 8 dinarim, but we're not goats. Okay, then he saw that Rabbi Yeshua wasn't wearing shoes, so he said to him like this: somebody who rides on a horse is a king. Who rides on a chamar, on a donkey, that's a regular free man. Somebody who has shoes on his feet is at least human, but somebody who has none of these is better. That is not any better, is even worse than somebody whose grave has already been made and is buried inside it. So Rabbi Yeshua said, Sris, you said three things, now you'll hear three things right back. The best part of the face, the glory of one, is the beard, and the joy of one's life is his wife, and his heritage is his children. Baruch Hashem, you don't have any of the three, thanks to your being a Sris. You don't have a beard, you don't have a wife, and you can't have children. So here he got him, and the Sris was upset, and he said, "You're a fighter. You're a bold fighter. Why you pick a fight with me?" So Rabbi Yeshua said, "You're a castrated. Why do you start up with me?" Okay, another story here. The Gemara says that Rabbi said to Rav Shimon ben Chalafta, "How come you didn't come visit me on Yontif?" Now he didn't say, "Why didn't you come visit me?" He said, "Why didn't I go visit you?" But what he meant to indicate was, "Why didn't you come visit me?" The custom had been for generations that Rav Shimon ben Chalafta's mishpacha went to visit Rabbi's mishpacha on Chol Hamoed. So he said to him, "Because I'm too old." He said, "Because the rocks that I used to climb have now grown very tall, hard for me, and the short distances I used to be able to walk have become very long, and I no longer walk on 2 legs, now I walk on 3 legs, and that which increases my shlem bias," he was referring to his male abilities, is not working properly, therefore I can't travel long distances. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the psukim in Koheles. So it says, "V'sugu dosayim bashok." When the doors in the street are closed, that refers to a person's orifices, the parts of the body that normally open and close, but they'll be stopped up, they won't work properly. Next it says, "B'svas koil hatachana." The sound of grinding isn't so much, that's referring to the stomach, which doesn't digest the food as well. V'yakam kol tzipor, when he wakes up at the voice of a bird, and even when a bird chirps, it wakes up someone who's old because he can't sleep well. V'yishachu kol b'nois hashir, and the songs of the singers aren't loud anymore, because even people who sing loudly sounds like they're whispering, meaning you can't hear properly. Now, the Gemara connects this to a incident with Barzilai Hagiladi, when the David HaMelech was chased out of his Malchus by his son Avshalom, who rebelled against him. He fled, and he met Barzilai Hagiladi, who supported him. When David returned, he wanted to invite Barzilai to come to stay in Yerushalayim with him, but Barzilai refused, and he said he's too old. So what did Barzilai say? He said, "Can I any more taste what I eat and what I drink? I can't anymore." So you see that people, when they get old, their senses fail. He also said, "Can I hear the sound of the singing?" So you see that they can't hear anymore, they can't taste anymore, and that's what's being referred to here by Shlomo HaMelech in Koheles. The Gemara says it's not correct. Barzilai is the one who said that they can't taste, but that's not correct, because in Rebbe's household there was a servant, a lady who was 92 years old, and she was responsible for tasting all the food to see that if it was properly spiced. So you see that you can be very old and still have good taste buds. Okay, the Gemara says that Barzilai's problem was that he was shotov bezima, he was constantly involved in immoral behavior, and that causes old age to come upon a person quickly. And now the Gemara compares the effect of old age on Talmid Chachamim versus Amaratzim, versus people who are unlearned. The Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yosi, he says, Talmid Chachamim, as the more they become old, the more their wisdom increases. Like it says, B'yishishim Chacham avarech yamim tevuna. In the old people there is wisdom, and those who have lived long there's a lot of understanding. But the Ami Aretz says right afterwards, it says as they get old they become more foolish. Like it says, Meisir Safal and Amanim V'tam Zekenim Yikach. Hashem takes away the speech of those he trusts, and he takes reason away from the old people, and they become demented. Okay, now back to the Psukim in Koheles. Gami Gavoya Yero, they fear height. This means that even a small little hill becomes a huge mountain to climb. Ve'chas chatim ba'derech, there are terrors on the road. That means that he's afraid to walk in the street because he might trip on any of the things there, and if an old man trips, it causes a lot of problems. V'nayetz hashoked, and the almond tree blossoms, that's referring to his hips, meaning that the bones flare out through the skin because the skin becomes very thin and wasted. V'yistakel achagav, and the grasshoppers become a problem. This refers to the area of the body that he sits on, because even if a grasshopper falls on him, it's very heavy. He has a hard time even supporting his own weight. V'tafer ha'aviyayna, and there's no more aviyayna. Aviyayna, the Gemara says this refers to the taiva for nashim, women. So the Gemara quotes the story to explain this. Rav Kahana was saying psukim in front of Rav, and he said this, and Rav gave a long sigh. So Rav Kahana said, you can see that Rav's Yetzer Hara has stopped, and therefore Rav is upset that he no longer has schar for fighting his Yetzer Hara. About that, Rav Kahana says further, what does the pasuk mean when it says Kihu Omar Vayehi? He said it and it happened. It refers to a woman, that it's a miracle that people have lusting after women, because if you think about it, it makes no sense, because a woman is a bag of skin filled with excrement and blood that comes out. So that's not very appealing if you think about it that way, and yet people still are driven. And that is a miracle that Hashem created it that way. And he also created another one, and this is what he says, Hutziva v'yamid, he commanded and it stood. That's a person's love for his children, and that he's willing to sacrifice much of his own freedom and abilities to be able to take care of his children, something that wouldn't make sense if not for the fact that Hashem created it that way. Okay, going back to Psukim in Koheles. A person goes to his home forever. Says Rabbi Yitzchak, it says his home, not the home. That means that everybody goes to his own place in the next world, because it's like a king, where him and his servants, when they leave the city, they go through the same doorway. So too, when people die, they leave the world the same way. However, they each go to a different place. The king goes to his royal lodgings, and others go to much less luxurious accommodations. Okay, now we're transitioning into discussing what happens after a person dies. Rabbi Yitzchak says, what does it mean when it says that childhood and youth, which it's referred to as shacharos in Koheles, this is earlier in Koheles, that it's hevel, that it's nonsense. This refers to things that a person does in his youth that makes him old quickly, and that's if he's involved in too much marital relations that makes old age jump upon him. Okay, Rav Yitzchak also says you should know that after the body is in the grave, the worms that are eating it cause pain as if pins are being stuck in the flesh of a living person. Again, the Mefarshim do not understand this literally. This is a pain of the soul, but not a pain of the body. The body itself doesn't feel anything after it is dead. But the pasuk that proves all this is Ach Basari Olav Yichav, its flesh will be in pain over itself. Now, Rav Chisda says that the soul, the neshama, mourns over the loss of its body for 7 days after the death, like it says, V'nafshe Olav Te'ebol, and Avel refers to 7 days, like it says, V'yas Aviv Avel Shevas Yamim, referring to the mourning for Yaakov Avinu. You see that Avelus goes for 7 days. Okay, now the Gemara has a story to support that. Rav Yehuda says, somebody who has died, if there are no avelim, nobody to sit shiva, then you bring a minion to the person's house and you sit shiva there. That minion sits there for 7 days. This person who died in the neighborhood of Rav Yehuda, there were no mourners, and he brought a group of 10 men and he sat there and they sat shiva, and then at the end of 10 days the dead man came to Rav Yehuda in a dream and he said, thank you for setting me at peace. Okay, now the Gemara is discussing more about what happens to the soul after the death. Rabbi Avo says that anything which you say in front of the body, the soul hears, and that is until Sheyisasem HaGoylel. What is Sheyisasem HaGoylel? Machlek is Rashi Taisvis. Rashi says it means that the coffin is closed. Taisvis says it means that the tombstone is put up over the grave. But either way, up until that point, the soul hears and understands everything. After that point, the soul does not hang around near the body. It moves to a certain extent to Shemayim, becomes more accepting of the fact that it no longer belongs in this world, and therefore it doesn't necessarily hear everything that's said. The Gemara says, Machlekes about this actually, Rav Chi and Rav Shimon, the son of Rebbe, argue about this. One says that it's until the goyel is closed, one says it's until the flesh is disintegrated in the grave. The Gemara brings a pasuk for each of them. Until the flesh decomposes, like it says, Ach b'sari olav yichav v'nafshi olav te'avol, it's in pain. The soul is in pain until, as long as it has b'saroi, and the one that says that it's until the coffin is closed, or the tombstone, that's from the fact that it says v'yoshav ha'ofar al ha'aretz kishahaya, it'll go back to the dust. Once it goes back to the dust, then the neshama goes back to Shemayim. Okay, going back. Varuach Tashov Elohim Hashem Nasana. The spirit goes back to Shemayim, to Hashem who gave it. The Gemara says that just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it to you, you should give it back. He gave it to you b'tahara, pure and clean. You should give it back pure and clean. You should not have made it dirty with averos. The Gemara gives a mashal for this. It's like a king who gave royal clothing to his servants. So the smart ones put it in a box, folded it away, and kept it away. The not so smart ones wore it wherever they went, and while they were doing their work. And then the king said, okay, now I want it back. And the smart ones gave it back clean, and the king rewarded them, and he was happy with them, and he said, you can go home, and these will be put in my royal chest. However, the fools, he was upset with them, he threw them into jail, and he said these things have to go to the laundry, and that's like people's bodies. When they're returned to Shemayim, if they were soiled, if they were ruined, they'll have to go to Gehenim to be cleaned and purified. Now we have psukim that show that the same applies to Tamid Chachamim and Rishayim. About Tamid Chachamim it says, Yavayu Shalom Yinucha al Mishkavaisam. Their bodies rest in peace on their couches, and their neshamas are bundled in the bundle of life. Ahayis nefesh adayni tzura b'tzror hachayim. Now about Rishayim it says, Ein Shalom am Hashem Hashem. They have no peace. And about their neshama it says, Ves nefesh ayvecha yikalena b'zechkaf akela. Their souls are tossed around as if in a sling. The Gemara explains what this means with the Brisa. The Gemara says that tzaddikim are put beneath the Kisei HaKavod. It means they're very close to Hashem. Like it says, they're bound up in life with Hashem. But Rishayim are locked in a sling, like a stone in a slingshot, and you have two malachim. One stands at one end of the universe, another stands at the other end, and they toss this soul back and forth, firing it from slingshots. The Farshim over here explain what it means as a very sense of lack of peace, lack of finality that they have, obviously not meant to be understood literally. Okay, now the Gemara discusses what happens to people who are not tzaddikim or Hashem. They're in the middle. The Gemara says, Rabbi asked Rav Nachman, what about them? And Rav Nachman says, it's a good thing you're asking me, because if I had been dead already, nobody would be able to tell you. I'm the only one who heard it from Shmuel, who said that both Rishayim and Beinonim, the wicked and the intermediate, are given over to a malach by the name of Duma, which means silence. But the wicked are led to a place of no rest, and the intermediate ones are put in a place where they do have rest. Okay, now, going further, what happens to the body? Long afterwards, Rav Mari says that the tzaddikim become dust in the grave at some point. It will not rot right away, but eventually at some point before Mashiach comes, before Tchias HaMesim, they will have to rot at some point, like it says, V'yashev ha'ofar al ha'aretz k'shehaya, and the dust will go back to the earth the way it was before. And now the Gemara has an interesting incident to illustrate that this has to happen. The Gemara says that there were some workers working in the land of Rav Nachman, and they dug up a grave, and it was that of Rav Ache bar Yoshia. They didn't know who it was, and the body in the grave, when his grave was disturbed, snorted. So they ran back to Rav Nachman and they said, we just dug up a grave and it snorted. So Rav Nachman came to the grave and he said to the body, who are you? And the body replied, I am Achai bar Yoshia. Now, several Mefarshim understand this literally, and several understand this entire concept as figuratively. There's no actual discussion between Rav Nachman and the dead, but Rav Nachman was having these discussions with others or with themselves. But the Gemara describes it as a conversation between Rav Nachman and the dead body. So the Gemara says that Rav Nachman says, why are you whole? How come you didn't break down? Rav Mari said that tzaddikim have to become dust in the grave. So, first of all, Achai bar Yoshia, who was many generations earlier, said, I don't know who this Mari is. I don't have to listen to him. So he said, what do you mean? But he brought psukim, whether you like him or not. It says, V'yashev ha'ofer el ha'aretz. So he said, okay, obviously, whoever taught you that Kahelis pasuk didn't teach you Mishlei, because in Mishlei it says, Urekav atzomais kina. The rotting of the bones is caused by jealousy, and I was never jealous during my lifetime, and therefore my bones don't rot. The Gemara says Rav Nachman reached out and felt the body, and it was real. It was not a mirage. So he invited him to his house. He said, come to my house. So he said, obviously, not only don't you know Ksuvim, you don't know Nevi'im either, because you don't know what it says in Yecheskel. You'll know that only Hashem is the one who can open graves. So you can't take me out of the grave. So Rav Nachman says, okay, no. So it says, Afar atavel afar tashav. It says, you are dust and you'll return to dust, so how come you're still whole? So he said that is only going to happen right before Mashiach, in order to have everybody be revived from the dust. So we'll have to turn to dust briefly before Tchias HaMesim will happen. Okay, now the Gemara has another story here. A Tzeduki came to Rabbi Avo, And he said, you said that everybody's soul is, that the tzaddikim's soul is under the kisei kavod. So how come when a witch raised Shmuel so that Shaul could ask him a question, he came out of the ground? What was he doing there? So Rabbi Bo said that was within 12 months of Shmuel's death, and the soul has not reached its final resting place. It still goes back and forth and spends some time on earth in the year following the death. That is why we have a velus for that year for a father or a mother. That's not what the Gemara says here, that's just a manning. Now the Brisa says that for the entire 12 months after one has died, his soul goes back and forth from the next world to this world, and after 12 months the body is totally decomposed and the soul doesn't come back and forth anymore, it goes to the next world and it stays there.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.